Welcome to the Excel Pod. Welcome to the Untied Podcast, where we unravel the knots of life with faith, wisdom, and encouragement, because together we're here to untie from tradition and embrace truth through powerful Bible teaching. My name is Garrett Bernethi. I'm one of the hosts of the show, along with my very good friend, Corey Sawyers. And today we are bringing you a part 2 of a study that we began last week over the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. And so I'm excited to get back into this and to look at these Beatitudes again. We talked about so much last week, just introducing the Sermon on the Mount in general, looking at the introduction for the Beatitudes and kind of how everything is laid out. And so I'm excited to get back into this and discuss and study this text together. This is arguably the greatest sermon ever preached, and it was preached in a number of places, most likely in a number of times, and so this wasn't a one-and-done type of thing, and so we talked about that as well, that these were words that Jesus was saying probably in many locations, which is something that sometimes we as preachers do. You go to one place, you can preach one lesson, you go to another place, they haven't heard it. Why wouldn't we use the same material? It's all coming from the same place. And so Jesus seems to do that in his ministry. But these are some great, great words. So we are excited that you're with us today. And again, as always, we hope that as you listen to this, that you'll like, share, follow, and subscribe to help us to grow this podcast and all of our podcasts on the Excel Pod Network. If you haven't checked those out, you can go to excelstillmore.net, go up to Excel Pod, and you can see all of the different podcasts that we have on the network that are a part of Excel Still More Inc. So we're glad that you're joining us today. And as always, we want to get into our first segment where we just talk about life and things that are going on, which is just kind of a fun time for us. And then we'll get into our studies. So as we begin, Corey, what's been cooking, my friend?
You know, not a lot. We're in that time of year where everything is just busy, busy, busy. And I was just thinking about this morning about how we've been doing a whole lot of either eating out or just grabbing something that we can throw together real quick. And it's been a few days since I've cranked up the old smoker, so I'm ready to. We're supposed to have some warmer temperatures this week. I'm usually at the, I don't know about you, our office is open in the mornings, and usually around lunch, we close the office. Sometimes I stay here and work, but a lot of times I'll go home and work there. And especially this time of year, I will very often sit outside in the front yard in a lawn chair and study for my sermons and whatnot. But, you know, we have the weather that they're predicting this week. I may do a little studying outside, enjoying the weather while the smoker is rolling a little bit.
There you go. Can't beat that. Well, we are going to experience some weather this week, but it's going to be tornadic weather. So,
well, I think
I'll be watching, but not my Bible. I'll be watching for a tornado, but
yeah. Well, I think we've got a little chance of that. I think once it hits y'all, it's supposed to head our way, but that's more towards, I think, maybe Thursday and maybe the weekend, a little bit lesser of a chance. But
yep.
But it's that time of year for that kind of thing to be going on.
It is, man. It's we have,
and I'll be honest, I don't want tornadoes, but we sure need rain here in West Tennessee. I don't know about in Oklahoma, but we are we are in not severe drought, but we're already in drought. This time of year, we're not used to being in drought situations in spring like this, but we are right now.
Well, we've been very fortunate over the last several days. We've actually have gotten some rain. Yesterday morning, I get to the building. For those listening, this is Monday morning when we're recording this, but so yesterday morning, Sunday morning, I always get to the building about 6 o'clock and just work through and prepare everything and get my mind right and all that kind of stuff. But it started just a really nice rain outside whenever the sun just started to get light. So I typically never do this, but I got my coffee and I just went out on the front under the awning there and just kind of stood there for a minute and just watched it rain. And it was so nice, just a good, nice soaking rain. And I don't know how much we got, but we got a decent amount for at least a couple hours. And supposed to get some more rain this week, so that's great. So we've been pretty fortunate so far because it was really, really dry around these parts. So
yeah, we need some rain, but we won't complain about that. We don't really want tornadoes, but we'll take some rain along the way. We're actually this morning we got to eat. One of our elders' wives had made yesterday morning a little thing that my daughter-in-law, Gordon's wife, Lauren, makes these little. My whole life I've eaten country ham on biscuits, but she makes country ham biscuits where she chops up the country ham and puts it and some cheese into the biscuit mix and then bakes it. It's just, that's one of the main reasons we let her in the family was because of her ham biscuits that she makes. But anyway, she's the only one that I've ever known to make them. First time she brought them over the house, I mean, they're pretty larping. And I told Gordon, I said, you better hang on to her. But anyway, she brought them yesterday morning for the college class, and there was some left over. And so she let us have them here in the office. And I ate a couple this morning, and they're pretty, I won't say they're better than Lauren's, but it's just been so long since I've had any of Lauren's. It's hard to remember what they taste like. Hint, hint.
Hint, hint. There it is.
Yeah.
Well,
so anyway.
I just want to note that for those who've been listening to our show since its beginning, and you'll know what I'm saying when I say this, that this is a big day because this is the first time this season that you have said Larapin. And normally we have been in there a while and it's been coming out on a regular, but this is the first. So we're just milestone right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, we've been doing a lot of fast food kind of stuff, so not a lot of larpening going on. But
oh man, well, not a whole lot of cooking around our crew either because we've been at a baseball game every single day.
You're too busy with baseball right now.
Oh
to
my
cook.
goodness, yeah. So it's been
you're living on concession stand food probably.
Oh
right
man,
now.
yeah, it's terrible. That and Kristen made something really good last night. I got no idea what it is, but it was really good. It had hamburger meat and some orzo noodle stuff in there, and man, it was good. She used some Kinder seasoning, taco seasoning in there. It was really good. So that's the first, maybe the second home cooked meal we've had in a minute.
Yeah.
But between that and the boys, they have been really into the Masters, which has been going on over the last several days, and trying to catch some of that. I didn't get to watch very much of it. Really, I didn't get to watch any of it, just kind of some of the highlights and keeping up with what's going on, who's leading. But so between golf and their obsession, or between baseball and their obsession with golf, Ryder is actually playing golf as well for the school. So he's got golf pictures today for the team. So both those things going on. So they're keeping us pretty hooked up. But
I guess
gotta enjoy it while it's here.
That's right.
Or
that's
just
right.
suffer through it.
In fact, one of the things I've been keeping up with the Masters this year is I can't remember his name, but the guy down in Texas that does the meat church stuff. he's been doing a whole lot of little reels and videos about his favorite. Of course, there's lots of egg salad and the pimento cheese and different things that the tomato pies and whatnot that are kind of traditions down at the Masters. But he's been talking about those and ranking his favorite foods at the Masters. He's been down there actually, but then he's been showing how to make some stuff that goes along with it. And again, I see those and I'm like, yep, I need to make some of that. Yep, I need to try that,
Yeah.
And so anyway.
The egg salad sandwich really sounds good. I like egg salad though.
Yeah, I'm not as crazy about egg salad, but I only started liking deviled eggs a few years ago.
Really?
Yeah, I love eggs. It was always a texture thing and maybe a little bit of a smell thing, but I never really liked them. And it would have been, I guess, maybe 2021. After we'd moved here to Martin, there's a sweet family, large family here in the congregation. And Miss Kathy is the grandmother who is widely known as one of the best cooks around. They invite, the whole family goes to her house on Sundays and she cooks the big Sunday lunch for the whole family. And if you ever get invited, whatever your plans were for that Sunday, you cancel them and you go.
Yeah.
Yes. But this is the first time that we'd eaten there. And when we first got there, we were standing in the kitchen just chit-chatting while she was finishing up making deviled eggs. And she got a big island in the middle of the kitchen, and that's where all the food's lined up. And so we start going through the line, and she's standing there at the end of the island, and I was not going to get one of the deviled eggs, but she looks at the plate, and she looks at me, and she looks at the plate, and she looks at me, and she kind of guilted me into getting one. Now, she said later, I wasn't intentionally doing that. I wasn't even thinking about what I was doing, but it seemed like it was. Anyway, I got one. She had some fresh sweet corn, and I was waiting to the very end. I left one bite of it, and I was going to eat that egg and then follow it down with some sweet corn to get that egg taste out of my mouth. Oh. And that was the best, by far, the best deviled egg I've ever eaten. And I'm like, that was really, I go back up there to get some more.
They were all gone.
And they were all gone. But ever since then, I've become more of an boiled egg fan. But I was the one, like, Memo every Thanksgiving would make a special little version of the dressing without the boiled eggs in it. Mama, when she would mix up tuna fish, she'd make me my own separate bowl without the boiled eggs in it. I've never been real picky eating, but that's one of the things I never really liked. But even that's changed for me now. So, but you don't like? It's you that don't like pimento cheese?
That's right. Don't like it.
That's what I was thinking.
But that's one of the big
sandwiches. That just
sandwiches
seems un-American to me, huh?
That's one of the big sandwiches down there at the Masters.
That's right.
So Kristen's aunt lives down there in Augusta, and
okay.
So we went down there several years ago, and she gave us a tour of the whole place. And we drove around the Masters, the golf course and all that stuff, which you can't see anything. I mean, it's all covered up, whatever. But every year she has gotten us something from the Masters, and so I have two shirts. One has the egg salad sandwich on the back, and the other has the pimento cheese sandwich on the back. So I really didn't know that there are like a bunch of others as well. So there's like ham and cheese on rye is a big one, and I don't know what the others
are. The cold fried chicken.
Yeah,
the cold fried chicken's a big one.
Yeah, so I didn't know that was more than that until really just recently when because there's actually been several who have been ranking those sandwiches this week, and I'm sure they've done it every year. I just kind of caught it this year, so But I bet it's pretty good. One of the guys, he tried the egg salad sandwich. He goes, "Yeah, I see why everybody talks about it." So apparently, it's pretty legit.
Yeah. That was one of the things he did was he went through and ranked his favorite things, from the concession stand or whatever. And, but
yeah. Well, we've also got this week, jumping from one thing to another, we've got our annual red and white game at Oklahoma Saturday. I don't know if they're going to televise it by any means, but anxious to see how that goes. Is Tennessee's this week as well?
No, they had theirs this past Saturday.
Oh, they did. Do you know how that went? Or
evidently, the offense looked a little suspect, which was expected. We have a redshirt freshman and a true freshman that is competing for the starting job this year. But supposedly the defense looked phenomenal, which we've got a new defensive coordinator this year who's one of the most respected in all of college football. He was at Ohio State when they won the national championship a couple years ago, and then he moved to Penn State last year, and then after all of their staff got fired, then he came to Tennessee. Their defense was good last year. It wasn't his defense that suffered, but anyway, there's been lots of articles about. I hadn't seen the game yet. I've got it recorded, but I hadn't seen it yet. But a lot of articles about is our offense that bad, or is it just that our defense is going to be that good this year? And Heupel has that reputation of we have a air raid kind of offense, but that's not really true. We've led the SEC in rushing like 3 out of the last 5 years or something. That's what he really wants to do is run the ball, and then play action pass. But I would be okay, especially with freshman quarterbacks. I'd be okay if we were more of an old school 20-13 winning kind of games this year. And our schedule is so brutal, that's probably what we're going to have to do is rely on our defense. And anyway, that's the latest out of Knoxville. So we'll see.
Everywhere that defensive coordinator has been very good because he was at Oklahoma State before he went to Ohio State. And so everywhere, I don't know where he was before that, but when he was at Oklahoma State, we were getting to see him every year, and they were pretty good. So he's the real deal. So but I'm anxious to see. We've got Mateer returning, which is good, but we've got a 5-star
which
QB.
He probably would have won the Heisman last year if he just stayed healthy.
That thumb, man, it messed him up, I'll tell you. So we'll see how it goes this year. But we've got a whole new look this year because we got a whole new tight end regime that's come in. We got Jason Witten, who joined the coaching staff.
Yeah. Former Tennessee great.
We got some major guys coming in from some monsters coming in as tight end. And his son is coming there, who's a really good linebacker. And so I'm really anxious to see how it all works. We got that new 5-star QB that's there, and he's supposed to be really good. Of course, you never know how that's going to be. They can be really good in high school and college. You just got to see. But so looking forward to seeing how that goes. And pretty much all year I look forward to football season. That's just where that's where I'm at. The boys are watching baseball and basketball, and I'm like, all right, let's get to football. So, but it'll be here. It'll come soon.
Oh yeah, I saw it this morning. First thing that when I pulled up Instagram this morning, first thing that popped up was a countdown from the UT football thing that 100 days to kickoff, and they had a little thing about Joey Aguilar, and I guess they're going to talk about a different player each time, but anyway,
it will be.
But I'm like you. It's either recruiting season, or it's preseason, or it's spring season, or it's all revolving around that to some degree.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
that's how.
The other things are just to hold our attention. The basketball team made it to the Elite Eight again, and the baseball team this weekend, first weekend this year, they've really looked like they should have. They swept Mississippi State at Mississippi State. So I'm hoping that's a turning point for the baseball team. But all that's just to keep us occupied until football season.
Pretty much, Yeah, we have been watching Oklahoma baseball and softball, keeping up with both of those, which softball ended up losing in the very end against Texas yesterday.
Yeah.
But Texas is really good. Oklahoma's really good. Texas is really good. There's a lot of really good softball teams. And then Oklahoma went back and forth with LSU, or the baseball team did. So, yeah, a lot of stuff to keep our attention.
Yeah. And, Tennessee played a brutal non-conference schedule and was undefeated number one, and then they get to SEC. And I won't say they've struggled, but they've lost a few games since they've been in the SEC. The SEC's just tough.
It is. It is.
We talk about it in football and basketball and other things, but women's softball, they are really, I would not be surprised if, you don't again have like 6 or 7 of the teams in the College World Series down there end up being teams from the SEC.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a gauntlet. Of course, you'll have a few from out west that probably do pretty well. I haven't been keeping up with any, but Arizona is always really good. UCLA is always really good.
UCLA.
Florida is always really good. Florida, but then Florida State is really good.
Yeah.
Trying to think of some of the others that we've seen, but softball's a big deal, man. It's a lot of fun to watch. You got to be honest. It really is.
Yep. Oregon, that's another one that's really good this year.
That's right. Yep.
Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska.
I'm trying to think of some of the teams that we played early in the year that was really good.
Yeah, Nebraska, they always do pretty good, but sometimes they've gotten to the World Series, sometimes they haven't, but they're always contending. So, but even that, the World Series will be here before we know it. Softball. So, it's going to be that's always a lot of fun, and it's a big deal around here because it's held here in Oklahoma City. So that's always a pretty fun thing. But we have got a study to get into, and
that's right.
We could talk about all this stuff all day long because Corey and I just love to talk about that stuff. So, but we're in Matthew 5. We're looking at the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is beginning his ministry, and just to kind of lay everything out, and you can do this, and it's always fun to, I think, try to put things in somewhat of a chronological order when you're going through each of the gospel accounts. But mainly, you've got Jesus who has entered into his time of ministry. He's baptized in the Jordan River by John the Baptizer, and then he goes into the wilderness for 40 days where he's tempted by Satan. Mark's account would lead us to believe that he was tempted during the entirety of that time, not just at the end, which kind of seems, though that's really what it seems that Matthew focuses on, is the last part of that. But he was fasting, he was praying, he was being tempted, a lot of things going on. And so now we're entering into the beginning of his ministry where he's got preaching, he's got the calling of the disciples. He called Peter, Andrew, James, and John, or Simon, Andrew, James, and John. And has that we've gone through this infamous, this famous calling, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And so they begin following him, and now Jesus is beginning his public ministry. There's some healing, there's some that's going on, there's some casting out of demons that's going on. And so we're entering into this time of preaching, and Matthew is really focused, it seems, on the things that Jesus has to say. And I'm so glad that he does this kind of even in a meticulous way in focusing on these sermons like this, and gives us an opportunity to really look at and evaluate and, these words for our life and consider them. And so I'm going to go ahead and click over to our other screen here. So those of you who are watching can see this, see the actual text if you're just sitting here watching this with us. But Corey, let me go ahead and just kind of read through this, get us back in the back to where we are, and then we can start working through this. But course, we have when Jesus went up on the mountain, he's got his disciples, and here's where he begins to teach. And it says in verse 3, and we'll read 3 to 12, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the poor in spirit, or pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So this is the text and where we are, and we looked at that word blessed, or however you want to say it, blessed. And it's not really a word that is leading us to the idea of happy, although the result is, of course, happiness. Verse 12, joy or rejoicing and being glad. But rather, this is the idea of being right with God. It's being approved by God. And these are the results of these types of ways of living and things of that nature. So that's kind of the introduction we discussed last week. And of course, the kingdom of heaven seems to be at the forefront of our minds, and lots going on here. So, Corey, let's dig into this. Where do we want to start? We looked at the first couple, I think, last week, but I don't know. Do you want to cover, kind of go back through that just to get us back in tune with where we are?
Yeah. So the first one is blessed are the poor in spirit, and we talked about last week that it's the idea of that they recognize they have a need for God, that they're spiritually empty without a relationship with God, and they realize that and know that. And that's the opposite of the arrogant, egotistical scribes and Pharisees that thought themselves to be the best of the best and didn't lack anything spiritually. And if we're going to be approved in God's sight, we first got to recognize that we need Him. So being poor in spirit, and if we do, then all of the riches that we might have spiritually, our heavenly home, will be, what we get in return, because God's going to provide for that spiritual need. And then, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Mourning over their failings, their spiritual life, their sinfulness, probably because they're mourning because they're not happy where they are spiritually. We talked a little bit about last week. This is the thrust of the Sermon on the Mount. The thesis is verse 20 of chapter 5. Unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll not enter the kingdom of heaven. So, we can talk about the fact that, yes, Jesus is promising that if we mourn, we can be comforted. If we lose a loved one, God cares about us, those kind of things. But in context, it's more about spiritual condition. So we're mourning, feeding off that first one. We recognize how spiritually poor we are, and then we mourn that, we're not more Christ-like, that we're not better. And so kind of like Romans 7, Paul has this conversation about, I've sinned and I don't want to be that guy. And that's the kind of mourning he's talking about. And we're comforted by the forgiveness that we know we can have. So you think about, like in 1 John, he says, I'm writing this so that your joy may be full. And then he begins talking about, if we walk in the light as he is in light, then the blood of Jesus continually cleanses us from our sins. So that's how we can be comforted for mourning over our sins.
There is
that's the first couple, at least.
Yeah. It's really interesting that the mourning part, again, I don't know, Corey. I don't know that maybe it's just me. I certainly don't I don't like speaking with blanket statements. But for me, as I was growing up, I had a huge misunderstanding of what all of this meant. To mourn is to cry. So happy are those who cry. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Happy are those who are poor. So, going into this and understanding that there is a big push here for the Spirit that a person needs to have as they approach God, as they live for God. I think that really seems to be the emphasis here about who and how we are supposed to be as followers of the Lord. And to have this mourning over or this deep sense of I'm trying to figure out the word that I want to use, a deep sense of sorrow. If we want to use Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 7, which we mentioned a little bit last week, this godly sorrow that's produced, and it's over our failings of sin and our failings whenever we fall short and give into the temptation that is in our life, which really should carry a lot of weight as Jesus is saying this, because Jesus has just been dealing with all of this. So he has, in some way, at some level, he is demonstrating or teaching about the very things that he has already been able to overcome and walk through. Now, it doesn't mean that at this point or stage in Jesus' life that he's done with temptation. It's certainly not saying that, but he understands the how. And in Hebrews 4, it tells us that we have a high priest that can sympathize with our weaknesses, and he understands those things. And so these words, I don't believe, are coming from a person who doesn't understand what he's saying, but a person who, does understand what he's saying, but also understands how intentional an individual must be in order to be blessed or to have those spiritual blessings in the end, which Paul says are in the heavenly places in Ephesians 1 and verse 3. And so all of this is kind of a push toward, like you said, a major direction in this spirit with these spiritual overtones as we're thinking about how am I supposed to be as an individual in a penitent way, in a spiritual way, so that I can live for really the kingdom of heaven. I can live for the Lord during the rest of my days.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So
you then you take that attitude into verse 5. The New American Standard says, blessed are the gentle. The ESV says, blessed are the meek.
mm-hmm.
Then that word that's translated there can mean gentle or meek or humble.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing in the word makes weakness. We think of meekness being weakness, but that's something that others have, said that, or have this connotation of if you're gentle and meek that you're weak, but that's not part of it. It's a sensitivity, a humble spirit, and
right.
Again, that's a God-approved attitude because you're willing to realize that the humility of that I hadn't got it all figured out, that I need help, that I need something, besides just me. And it's interesting because, we live in such a dog-eat-dog world, but this is the person who's saying instead of dog-eat-dog, it's the idea you go ahead and you climb the ladder of, let me help you climb the ladder of success.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the world would say, well, you do that, you'll never get to the top. Jesus says, if you do that, not only will you get to the top, you'll get it all. You'll inherit the earth. And you can think of that in two different ways, kind of in an Old Testament mindset, which is what they're living in now, where if you're faithful to God and you have the right kind of humility towards God, that there's a physical reward here in this earth. Maybe that's what Jesus means, but it seems to me it's more the idea of like the promise he had in 2 Peter 3 and verse 13, that you're going to inherit not something that's going to be destroyed and burn up, but you're going to inherit a future reward, the new heavens and the new earth. But, I wouldn't argue with anybody that thought either way. I lean towards the second of that, but I know there's some that thinks that he's talking about the first way, and I can't really necessarily say that. But again, it's this idea of being humble enough to realize that it's not all about me, which flies in the face of the way the scribes and Pharisees lived.
Yeah, and going back to that 2 Peter passage, the whole point, really the main point of this, I think really aligns with what we're talking about here in the Sermon on the Mount in verse 11. It's the main point. What sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of the Lord? That's the whole point of that. And as Jesus is considering these things, and I'll tell you this, that growing up, as I first started hearing about this, and I keep mentioning this because, our audience might be made up of people who have been studying for years and years and years, and our audience may also be made up of people who haven't studied this a whole lot, or people who, so just trying to tackle this from multiple angles. But I had heard for a long time that the idea of being poor in spirit was the idea of being humble in spirit. And certainly there might be a sense of truth to that. But again, I think it all works together. If we're going to be right with God, we certainly ought to be humble in spirit. But this idea of gentleness, which you have already laid out, can mean a few things. It can be translated humble or meek. But it seems that that's really leading us more to the humility aspect of what Jesus is getting at, where because humility is the idea of submitting to the will of another person or submitting to the will of God. And that is something that we are certainly called to do, is to submit in certain, relationships in our life. Peter mentions that in 1 Peter 2 and 3, the idea of authority. Paul also discusses that idea. You're submitting to your husbands, you're submitting to your wives, you're submitting to your elders, you're submitting. So this idea of humility is really subjecting ourselves to the will of others as a humble person. And to be humble is not to be weak, but it's something that actually is really showing a great deal of strength, that you are able to submit to others. And I think that we kind of have a backwards understanding of that if we submit, we're showing weakness. But I really believe that the strongest guy in the room, if you will, is the guy that realizes he doesn't run the room. It's the guy who realizes that he's going to submit to the one who does. And
That's right.
It's self-control. It's, there's so many things we could go into that, but I think the poor in spirit and the gentle have kind of been mixed up in some way, at least in my understanding. And I could have done that on my own. But, hopefully in this study, we kind of clarify the different directions of these things and to just provide clarity.
We can untie from the tradition.
That's right. Untie from it. And that's what this is all about. So,
yeah. All right. So you're poor in spirit.
Yep.
Because you realize you're spiritually bankrupt. You're mourning over your sin. You're recognizing your need for humility, putting God first, which leads you to, and hopefully you're seeing how these kind of build on top of, and by you, I mean the audience, you're seeing how these build on top of each other. Verse 6, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they'll be satisfied. Well, the people in Jesus' time lived meal to meal. So, what you had was what you ate. And if you got more than what you needed, you shared with others, because it would ruin before. That's why later on he's going to say that you have to pray for your daily bread. We have bread now that will last a month on the countertop past its expiration date with all the preservatives and whatnot, but not so back then. Hunger was the world they lived in. But what are they hungering and thirsting for? For righteousness. They long to do what's right, what God approves. And if you do hunger and thirst for righteousness, they will be satisfied. And I can't read this verse without thinking about the Snickers commercials. Hungry, Snickers satisfies. Well, eventually that Snickers doesn't satisfy because it wears off, or you end up with diabetes if you eat too many of them or whatever. But, we eat physically and we're satisfied for a while, but then there's more that we want eventually. Well, that's the way it should be with righteousness. Not just doing some good things and being satisfied for the rest of our lives, but every day I want to do what's right. Every day there's a longing, a hunger to learn more about God, to do more for God, to turn away more from the things that are wrong, to do what's right in the eyes of God. And God approves those, and he puts them in a position where they can feed that hunger.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he's going to bring this back up in Matthew 6:33, the idea of seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So the idea of righteousness, what is righteousness? Righteousness is it means doing the will of God. So we have this idea of submitting to authority, essentially, or submitting to the will of others. In this case, submitting to the will of God, as we're talking about right now. But we are really doing the will of God. That's the righteousness part of this thing. It's the rightness of God. It is doing the things that God has declared right within our life, or within all of life in general. So it's righteousness is I think one of those spiritual words that religious people like to use. But if we really get down to what it actually means, it is the standard of God's will, and it's our ability to walk in it. So if we're connecting other places, it would maybe be said in another way, walk in the light as he is in the light. That would be a walking in righteousness. That's 1 John 1:5 and 7. There's a lot of other ways that Paul would demonstrate that idea, but that really is what it's like, what it's about. It's about walking in the will of God, submitting to his will, walking in his will, obeying his will. So the beginning and end of Romans talks about the idea of faithful obedience. Romans 1:5, Romans 16, well, it'll come to me toward the end of the chapter there. I want to say 25. I don't know if that's right, but anyways, that idea of faithful obedience is walking in the righteousness of God. And I think that's really the point here. That we're seeking the right things of God. We're seeking the will of God, and we're moving forward as that is, the thing that we ought to be seeking, according to Matthew 6 and verse 33. So, like you said, Jesus was using something that the people would understand, but at the same time, he's not talking about physical food, but rather the idea of doing the will of the one who had sent him to do, that work.
Yeah, and the faithful obedience is kind of the idea, as we've talked about before, words, and this is a Dan Owenism, but words mean what the author intends for them to mean. Mm-hmm. That, how you described it, is exactly the way Matthew is using it, or I guess we'd say Jesus originally used it in this sermon. Paul in Romans, righteousness is talking about like justification. It's mm-hmm. that we are, credited with being in a right standing with God, kind of deal. But again, that doesn't happen without the faithful obedience. And that's kind of mm-hmm. You get over to Romans chapter 6, and it's, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? We've been raised to walk in newness of life. That's this life that he's trying to talk about here. So, it's a big deal in a lot of places that maybe a little bit of a variance on the way that they're using the word, but for the way that it is in the Sermon on the Mount, the way you described it is exactly right. It's wanting to live by God's standard, and he's really when you get to the meat of the sermon, the end of chapter 5 and chapter 6, you really, into chapter 7, you see that it's the way that we would define righteousness, particularly the scribes and Pharisees, versus the way that God defines righteousness, and it's two different things.
Right. And we probably won't get into this, but once we get into Matthew 7, we're really going to see that coming true. I mean, the two different, broad is the path and narrow is the way kind of thing, and many will say to me on that day. And so when we talk about untying ourselves, we really are saying that we've got to untie from these traditional thoughts or these traditional historical mindsets of men that have been passed down from generation to generation, really kind of creating this culture or tradition of I am enough, or I can get to heaven on my own, or what I feel is right matters. Well, maybe in some sense that might be the truth, but when it comes to spiritual things, that's never the truth. It is God's way that truly matters for our life. And I think that as we go throughout the rest of this sermon, we're definitely going to see that more and more as time goes on.
Yeah, when you get on down in chapter 5 and he says, you've heard it said, but I say unto you, kind of deal.
Yeah, which maybe I don't know, I'm going down through there. It is boom, 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 boom. And there's a great connection between Mark. I told you we're preaching through Mark. I'm preaching through Mark, but that idea is such a huge connection. And I don't know, maybe we could do something fun with that to attach for people. But if you will just go through and highlight that as you prepare for us to get through there, you're going to see it is a major point that Jesus is making. He's establishing, here's the ways of traditionally what you've done, and here's what I'm saying. And there are two different things, which again goes back to the idea that everything that Jesus is saying here is he's saying by way of his authority. Right. And that is something that we'll prove over and over again. But
yeah. Well, here's another one, verse 7. Here's another one that doesn't fit maybe the way we think of it typically. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And this word merciful means, we think of it as meaning like being forgiven, or forgiving rather, but it means a whole lot more than that, because it's the word in the original language just means extending kindness toward others, or Michael Heitz always defined it as doing for others what they can't do for themselves. So that would include forgiveness, but it's a much broader concept than that. Stopping and fixing a flat tire, or giving someone some food, or giving them a shoulder to cry on, or giving a young couple with kids, giving them some free babysitting so they can have a night out without the kid. It's giving them what they need. And he says that if, now we've gone through these steps of I'm mourning over my sin because I realize I'm poor in spirit. I realize how spiritually bankrupt I am. I'm mourning over my sin. I'm seeking after righteousness. Once I get myself in a right relationship with God, what do I want to do? I want to extend that out in my everyday life. And this is part of it, is showing mercy. And he says, if you show mercy, then you're, what goes around comes around. You're the one who extended mercy. God will see that you're the recipient of mercy when you need it.
Mm-hmm. Which really does demonstrate on a pretty high level that if God is offering you something, he's going to treat you in a certain way. He has a very healthy expectation that you do the same thing.
Yes.
And I realize that this is it's the same thing, but it's also in a different context. But an illustration of that kind of thing would be in Matthew 18, where you have the servant who is forgiven a great debt, and then he goes and he has somebody who has, who is owing him a debt, which is much, much smaller, not even hardly a percentage of what he owed. And he does not offer the same thing. Well, when the king finds out what he had done, his expectation was for him to kind of pass that forward. I treated you this way, I offered you this. Why would you not offer that, to someone else? And so while it's talking about different things, the principle is still there that Jesus, God has offered us an extreme amount of mercy, and there really is an expectation for us to do the same thing. It's like taking on the mind of Christ, Philippians 2, 1 through 8 or 10, where we're doing the things, we're thinking the things that Jesus is thinking, doing the things that Jesus is doing, and exemplifying all of that in our life. We're looking to the example and following that example And that seems to be where he's going with this idea of love and forgiveness and mercy and all of that to extend that to others.
Yeah, even in chapter 6 in the Sermon on the Mount, he teaches them how to pray, and part of that is ask God to forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Well, then after he gives that model prayer, then it's like, well, let me clarify something for you. So if you forgive others their trespasses, then your Father in heaven will also forgive you of your trespasses. But if you don't forgive them of their trespasses, then your Father in heaven won't forgive you of your trespasses. And then he talks about the golden rule. As you would that men should do unto you, do you to them likewise. So it's like you said, there's a high expectation of us, of how we treat others is going to be, how God's going to treat us is very contingent on how we treat others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which John really does I think a great job of, especially in all three of the epistles, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. But what we do learn is that our relationship with God is contingent on our relationship with one another, and our relationship with one another is contingent on our relationship with God. So there is an intertwining of these relationships that really, again, I don't think that there's I probably shouldn't say it as here's a teaching, but rather this is the expectation. This is how one in Christ treats another. This is how a follower of God treats others, whether they're in Christ or not. There should be a healthy realization or understanding. This is how you treat people. This is how you submit. This is how you love, so on and so forth. Because this is, as we'll get down into it, essentially how one can be light and how one can be salt, in this sense, by exemplifying these types of things.
Yeah. So speaking of relationships, verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. So lots of turmoil in Jesus' time between religious sects and with the Romans and those kinds of things. That the Greek is actually a compound word, doer of peace. So the opposite of this word would be a meddler or a busybody or a gossip or a mischief maker or someone that's causing strife. We think of peace as the absence of fighting, but when there is strife, there is no peace. And if we're a peacemaker, we're being like God. And there's a ton of places that we could go, but we won't for time's sake, about how much that God hates those who sow strife among brethren, and how that Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and how that my peace I give. And I just got through preaching yesterday from John chapter 20, that Sunday evening of Resurrection Day on the first day of the week, and two times in that one, he tells the 10 at that point, peace be unto you, and then 8 days later when Thomas is with him, he says that he wants peace. And so those who try to promote unity and harmony, not cause division, they're the ones who are sons of God, which is kind of a like a Jewish way of saying things that helps you to see that you're like, there's lots of, like, we're sons of light and sons of darkness and sons of the day and all different kinds of things, but it just means you have those characteristics. Like,
right.
People my whole life have said, well, I can tell you're Mike Sawyer's son. Well, if we are peacemakers, then we are showing we're being like God, because that's what God wants, is peace between brothers and sisters and peace between us and him. And the only way that peace is really available is when we do things his way.
Yeah. Well, Paul writes that God is the God of peace, and we should have the same love and motivation. But I think you bring up a really good point that, if your dad walks in a room and then you walk in a room after, probably going to be a healthy resemblance that you two are related. And if my son Cohen were to walk in a room and I walk in right after, you're going to know, all right, those two, I can put those two together. I think that really is the deal, is that, people can claim to be faithful and religious, but people will know that you're faithful or religious just by what you do and how you act. You know, when they looked at Jesus with his teaching, how he treated people, they automatically knew he was different. And they started talking about how he was different. Well, that should be what happens when people see us. They see somebody who is different. He reacts, or he or she rather reacts differently. They talk differently. They think differently. There is something that's going on there that just ain't like everybody else. And it has to do with this idea. I don't know if we skipped over pure in heart or if we touched on it and I just didn't mark it, but you know, this idea
I think we actually skipped it. It's my fault.
So these two, 8 and 9, so pure in heart and peacemakers, they shall see God and be called sons of God. And like you said, the sons of God is like saying that the characteristics of God. But the pure in heart is, you know, it kind of goes back to the idea of righteousness from really aligning ourselves with the will of God. And then that obedience, it brings about the idea of purity or cleanliness or holiness. And it's a separate way of thinking. It's a separate way of acting. It's doing the will of God. Denny Petrella, right? He said doing the will of God must go deeper than actions. So when we talk about the soul, the heart, soul, mind, you know, all that Moses said and that Jesus said as well, it's talking about the inner man. And so God's will becomes your will in a sense, because you're aligning yourself so closely. That relationship, I don't know that we can really talk about the relationship that we have with God enough. We talk about that with marriages. We talk about that with our children. We talk about that with people in the church. But there really, truly is a relationship that must be built with God. And the closer you are with God, the more you begin to act like God. Not act like God in the fact that you're a God, not that. But you begin to formulate your life according to what he's teaching you. And, you know, if we just lay an easy example application of that, Proverbs is a great place, or even Ecclesiastes. But, you know, when Solomon is writing to his son, he's offering, here's the things I've done, here's the things I've tried, here's the ways that I've lived, here's what you need to do. Take my advice, take these things, listen, apply them to your life. And that's, you know, the entirety of the text is showing us, here's what hasn't worked, here's what doesn't work, here's what does work, here's what will work, and here's how all this works together and why. And if we will build that relationship and value it, then the blessings of living like this will be seen all throughout your life, and you will be pure in heart, clean, holy. And eventually, whenever it comes time, the church, the people in the church, the bride of Christ will be presented without spot, without blemish. That's kind of essentially the idea. There's nothing that can be held against you because you're living in the right way.
Yeah. And you're right. The relationship I have with God, last night in the sermon last night, I used this line. We're talking about Joseph, but I was talking how your awareness of God determines your response to sin. You know, how aware I am of God in my life and the relationship that I have with him is going to determine how I respond to sin. That's what Joseph was all about, is that how can I commit this sin against God, talking to Potiphar's wife? You know, that's the relationship that really matters the most.
Right. So we've got, they shall see God. What is that really referring to? The idea of seeing God. I know Hebrews 12 and verse 14 talks about those who have been sanctified. You know, there's the idea of seeing the Lord. 1 John 3:2, being able to see God based on one's being, the idea of being pure in a way. And, what are we actually talking about that they will see God?
Yeah, I think I've got written in my Bible, Hebrews 12 and verse 14 that you mentioned, but I've also got Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. Behold, the Lord's hand is not so short that it cannot save, nor his ear so dull that it cannot hear, but your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he will not hear. If our sins is what separates us from God, it's when we get back around to that pure in heart that's what allows us to be with God, to see God, to be in his presence. When we have that relationship restored through these steps that we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So when we're truly pure, the scribes and Pharisees would have been walking around in their robes and their tassels and say, do we not look pure? But that little prepositional phrase of in heart made all the difference. It wasn't just the outward stuff, which is really what he gets to in chapter 6. At the very beginning of it, he says, don't practice your righteousness for men to be seen of them. Mm-hmm. That's what they were doing. It's not coming from the heart.
Right. So it's what's really neat is kind of the build here. The pure in heart, for they shall see God, or then blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. So this is really kind of moving us to this alignment aspect of what it means to truly walk as a servant of the Lord, and not necessarily a literal, well, if you do this, you're going to see God kind of thing. But, even being called sons of God, we're children. Romans 8 says that we're children of God. We're adopted sons of God, or so there's so many things that are going on here, but really this is about aligning. It's about being seen in the same way because you're living according to that will. So very cool how Jesus is really laying all of this out in a very simplistic fashion once you really begin to break it down and dig into this.
Yep. And then when you are aligned with God and you're a son of God and you think everything is hunky-dory at that point, but it's not, because there's still a possibility of problems. So he talks about in verses 10 through 12 about being persecuted for righteousness' sake. The scribes and the Pharisees would have thought that if you're being persecuted, that means you're not in a good relationship with God. Jesus and other writers would tell us that's not the case. But notice verse 11, it's all kinds of categories of persecution. When they insult you, when they revile, when they persecute, say false things. So you've got this insulting, like verbal assaults against you. You've got the actual persecution that would be like physically hurting you. And then you've got these false accusations that are made. And it's all on account of him, for the sake of righteousness. So you can be persecuted, but it not be for righteousness. There's no glory in that. That's what 1 Peter talks about. You're getting what you deserve. But when you're doing what's right and you're being persecuted, you're suffering, that's what he's talking about here. Something that never would have, it's not like, you slip on the ice in the wintertime and you break your leg and, well, I'm just suffering, for the sake of the Lord. No, it's like this would have never happened to you if you'd not been standing up for Jesus and the gospel. And if all that happens, he says, verse 12, rejoice. Well, now we're talking about the word for happiness. That's a different word in verse 12. Be happy, because you're in some pretty good company with some of the greatest men and women. You go and read Stephen's speech in Acts 7. All of those people that were persecuted for doing God's will, you're in the same category of people as them. And so great will be your reward because of that.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting how this starts, the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then we have, and this is going to pop up all throughout, but your reward is in heaven. And that's not the only time that we're going to see this. The idea of kingdom and heaven and reward is it's really seen. Even verse 10, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is like a thread that just continues to build, because we're not doing all this for nothing. There is something in the end. There is a reward, and to understand that this is all for a purpose is really powerful. Jesus teaches on heaven a lot. Jesus teaches on hell a lot, but mainly he's going through and teaching the difference in how we live, how we think, and what we do, and the consequences of either of those. And this is such a magnificent way to begin that teaching within his ministry, and to realize again, because in this section of Jesus's life, he's in the middle of calling people. He's calling his disciples. He's going to call others to be disciples. Eventually, he's calling everybody to be disciples. But in this, what he's wanting them to understand, Luke does an excellent job of this, is explaining that there is a price to following. This isn't, when you're blessed, like we've said before, this isn't about, follow me and I'm going to give you all the money in the world. Follow me and I'm going to give you whatever you want. That's not the idea at all. And like you mentioned, 1 Peter 2, really 21 through 25, and chapter 4, verses 14 through 19, that idea of suffering. John Moore said one time, and I'll never forget it, that some of our finest hours as Christians may be in the time of suffering. That might be our finest hour, in fact. And so by following Jesus, what we are being guaranteed is the fact that we know that in the end, salvation is true. It's real. And we can know that we can be saved, 1 John 5, 1 through 3. So if you are, just like when Peter and good grief, I've just gone blank. When they were released from being thrown in jail, and they're released, and they're all happy because they were
Peter and John.
John, yeah. I kept wanting to say Silas. I'm like, that's not right. But they were released, Paul. And they're so excited that they were found worthy to be persecuted in that way. That's a different mindset. So what we are guaranteed is that if we will do this in the right way and put on the armor of God and allow the Word of God to dwell within us, He'll write His law on their hearts, then we can see these things all throughout life, even in our toughest times. And so if somebody is persecuting you for the sake of Christ, that's not by accident.
Yep.
We can take that in a negative way, but we shouldn't.
Yeah, last night, that's what we were studying about with Joseph. He keeps doing what he's supposed to do, and yet bad things keep happening to him.
Yeah.
But 3 times in Genesis 39, it's repeated, and the Lord was with him. And so the point I was trying to make last night in the sermon, we say God is good all the time whenever, we get news we want to hear or positive things happening, whenever. But God is good all the time, even in those bad things that we endure in this life. And, as Peter puts it, you're going to suffer either for a little time here and be glorified in eternity by God, or, you can be glorified by men here for a short time and then suffer at the hands of God for eternity. Well, you put it in those terms, and it's a much easier decision to make. But anyway.
Yeah, we looked at Psalm 23. We're studying through the Psalms this year. And Psalm 23.
I love that.
Oh, I know. And but Psalm 23 is in many ways kind of resembling what we're discussing here, with the troubles of life and things of that nature. But David, was a guy who, I think in Psalm 23, he's looking back. David's trying to do the will of God. He's God's king. He's anointed king, but he's had a lot of trouble. And so in all things, he knows, first off, that the Lord is the Lord forever. That's the first three and last three words of that psalm. But ultimately, he's shepherd. He's always there. He's always calling. So you have this beginning where the Lord's with him, but then you have the deep, dark, shadowy places of life. Well, the Lord's still with him, and then in the end, he's gonna, ultimately, he's protector. He's, all these things for David, and in many ways, that really is what we need to understand with this. That when we're called and we follow God, when we follow Christ, that's not a guarantee your life here will be blessed from a physical standpoint. But what it is a guarantee of is that your life will be blessed spiritually and eternally. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we're getting at, is that the reward in heaven, and maybe we just look over this, it's great. We can't miss that. Your reward in heaven is great. And that's something to look forward to. But it may not be an easy road that we're on as we strive for that goal. But keeping this healthy mindset that we're going to submit to God no matter what, in the end, it's all going to be good. And that's really important. And, another thing is that to know that you're not the only one, I think that's really powerful. All throughout history, that's really, really powerful. And I think gives us a little bit of strength. It gives us some courage. If others can do it, so can I. And ultimately, Jesus did as well. Yep. So I think that's two things that we all ought to think about.
Yeah, so you get the last three verses of the Beatitudes, and it's another reminder that this is not about being happy in this life. This is not everything's going to be, Pollyanna, you're walking along with the Smurfs singing la, 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 or whatever. This is about spiritual things. And yes, it may be tough here, but we untie from that way of thinking that has gone all the way back to the book of Job, the time of Job, that, if you're suffering, you're not in God's, in a relationship with God. If if things are going well for you physically, that means you're in a right relationship with God. No, untie from that way of thinking and realize that what God really wants is for you to have a relationship with Him, a real relationship with Him, and to ultimately live for eternity with Him.
Mm-hmm. And, just hearing you, and I know that we're not going to go into a study of Job, which would be very easy for us, but but that, just hearing somebody say that, this is what they believe, that if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. And we look at that, or we listen to that, and it's like, well, okay, I got that. I understand that. That's absolutely not true. But then we live like it is true. Mm-hmm. So while that may have been the thought process thousands of years ago, possibly pre-flood, that mindset's still going on today. Well, I've done all these good things, so God's going to bless me to get good things. Jeremiah, I don't think really exemplifies that idea. Job certainly doesn't exemplify that idea, even though all his friends had that mindset. But in the end, the important thing is that they understood, going back to this relationship, Job, Jeremiah, we could name a bunch of others, they understood their relationship with God, and in the end, they were blessed and they were found faithful, and that we can't overlook those, that important point.
That's right.
So, well, Corey, this has been a great study as we've looked at looked at the Beatitudes here in Matthew 5, 1 through 12, really 3 through 12. And this is such an enriching study and sermon that we can go through and share. And we hope that all of you have enjoyed your time with us as we've been looking at this over the past 2 episodes. This is just really, really great stuff. And we hope that you'll take this. We'll have the different texts that we mentioned in our show notes that you can refer to in your own study. We hope that you'll take this and do your own study and just help, see this as a launching point for your ability to look at this and study this on your own, to grow on your own and align yourself with God as you strive to walk with Him each and every day of your life. Next week, we are going to be moving on, and we're going to be looking at the salt and light passages, and looking forward to that study as we continue on going through the Sermon on the Mount this season, and really trying to find those things that we need to untie from in a traditional cultural way that might have been developed over years and years, or just maybe within yourself, so that we can align ourselves with God and see His will for what it is and change our will to His and not the other way around. So until next time, we hope that the Lord will bless you in all that you do. We look forward to studying Salt and Life with you next week. And we hope that if you do have any questions or comments, we would love to see those, hear those, read those, and even try to answer those if you have those questions, so that we can help you grow in your spiritual walk as well. So thank you for joining us. Again, like, share, subscribe, and follow this podcast and all the other podcasts on the Excel Pod Network. And we look forward to being with you next time around. And so until then, we hope that you will stay untied.